Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Welcome to the Conference on World Affairs. For recording purposes, I've been asked to share the following information. Today is Wednesday, April 10th, and it is 12 o'clock p.m. This is panel number 17985, titled From Red, White, and Blue to Red versus Blue, a satirical look at how polarized we are. Hopefully this is the panel you all intended to be at today. My name is Erin Ashbaugh, and I'm a Buff alum, parent, and staff member. I am the program manager at the Center for Environmental Journalism and have 3 very funny kids who tell me I have no sense of humor. And so this is the perfect panel for me to moderate, as I hope to glean a few tips from this conversation and prove them all wrong. Before we get into the exciting part of this event, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought to Indigenous people, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU students, staff, and faculty in their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Another thing I'd like to mention is how we'll handle the Q&A. We want to be sure you get a chance to ask questions, and so we'll reserve the end of the discussion for this. We're using a note card system, so at any time during the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers. If you're a student, please note this on your card. When you finish, raise your hand, and the producer will collect this and bring it up to me. I encourage everyone to please make your questions brief and to the point, and please write legibly so I can actually read your handwriting. We'll get to as many questions as possible, depending on how many questions you all ask. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce each panelist. You can, of course, find more information on the CWA website. Lisa Graves is one of the nation's foremost experts in exposing how special interests distort public policy and try to thwart the public's interest in a thriving and inclusive democracy. She has worked with journalists and other researchers to shine a bright light on the dark money fueling regressive agendas that target vital institutions in our republic, such as our courts and public schools. Michael Spencer is a freelance performance maker, director, and writer who has devoted his career to teaching and professional practice. Michael's art practice, like his teaching, reflects the shift in the role of designer, embracing the idea of the designer as auteur or author. And his practice provokes questions surrounding the definition of performance. Scott Dikkers is widely regarded as one of the most influential pioneers in comedy history. A best-selling author, comedy writer, and comedian, Scott performs stand-up and has appeared on well-known TV shows like Late Night with Conan O'Brien and Saturday Night Live, using his love of comedy to overcome personal trials and tribulations. More about substance and hype, Scott emphasizes the need for creative process to be open, challenging, and engaging for teams and individuals to achieve their dreams. This is an impressive and diverse group of speakers we have here. And now I'd like to give each of you a chance to talk briefly about how your experience relates to today's topic, using humor and bridging divides to allow conversations about politics, outlooks, and cultural beliefs. Scott, care to start?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. Thank you for that introduction, Aaron. Hi, everybody. So people always ask me, you know, does satire change anything? Like all the work you've done at The Onion, you know, your 20s and 30s and 40s, did they mean anything? Did it change? And my answer is always, no. I feel like at its absolute best, political humor, satire can maybe open people's minds, help them think a little more critically. But I mean, seeing the way that our politics in this country has devolved in the last 30 years, seems like maybe we've had the opposite effect. We've polarized so that the people who get it move in one direction, and the people who never see it or never read it or can't read move in a different direction. And maybe that's part of what the polarization is. And obviously there's a lot of specialization. There's a lot of siloing and people finding their niche. You know, when I grew up, I'm sure a lot of us here, when we grew up, there were 3 networks and PBS, and we all shared the same culture. We just don't share the same culture anymore. So that's part of the divide. I think, I don't want to get too gloomy here, but I'm an optimist at heart, but I don't have any faith in like the human race. I think we're doomed. Oh my God, we're so doomed. Imagine if the Starship Enterprise came to Earth, and any cast you want, Captain Kirk, Picard, Janeway, whatever you want, and they saw Earth, they'd be like, what a fucking shit show. Let's get the hell out of here. There's nobody in charge. We're just making a total mess of things. Like we put the stupidest people in charge of things, and we have terrible systems. Nothing works. You know, people are dying in the street. And, you know, in America, like we're the 1% of the world. Any other country, basically everybody's dying in diphtheria-infected swamps. You know, that's our Earth. That's what we've got here. And we're destroying it on top of that. So I'm going to try to keep my gloom and doom to a minimum. But I feel like humor, and political humor and satire in particular, is kind of like the final stage of grief. I don't know if any of you follow Guy McPherson. Do you know that guy? He's a real doomer. Do you know that guy? I see a couple of heads nod. So I'm a big fan of his work. He's a scientist, and he gave up tenure and moved into the desert because he realized there's no way we can beat climate change at this point. It's too late, and I don't want to be part of the problem. And he has a great theory that there's a 6th stage of grief, and that is gallows humor. So it's after acceptance, you go to gallows humor. And I feel like I've been there my whole life, because when I was a kid, I thought we were all going to die in a nuclear war, because the Cold War was happening. Russia, you know, there could be a mistake, and we'd all die. And after the Cold War ended, it was climate change. And, you know, we've known about climate change since, well, the 40s. But it started to become a little more of a public awareness thing in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, with the ozone layer, stuff like that. So I gave up like a long time ago, but it's still fun, you know, I'm still gonna do it. So that's my main thought about the question, can satire change things? No. And then the other thing is, how polarized we are. So am I done, or should I? You're doing good. Okay. Just really quickly on this one. I touched on this a little bit about how we're all kind of in our own niches and all that. But as far as the left-right polarization, I really feel like that's a manufactured divide that's manufactured by the corporate media. They write the narrative. The right and the left politically, like the red and the blue, they're on the same side. They're for the corporations. They don't care about regular people. They care about profits, and they will destroy the earth for their profits. That's the bottom line. Anyone like who's a citizen, who's part of the 99%, not the 1%, who thinks that there's a real divide between people is is a stooge of the corporations. The corporations have convinced them that that's what the public is, that they're separate into blue camps and red camps, and it's just not accurate. You talk to anybody, and I go all over the country and I meet all different kinds of people. My family are all like rapture right Christians, hard right people. You can talk to anybody and you can connect on basic issues, and we all kind of agree on the same things. All the politicians are crooked, the corporations own everything, and they own the politicians, and oh my God, I wish somebody would do something for the people once in a while. If a politician ever ran on that, first of all, the corporate media would stop them. They wouldn't get far. But if they ever succeeded, then we actually would have a chance at like a reasonably well-run society, and we're just never going to get there. So, sorry, I promised no more gloom and doom, and I came right back to it. Couldn't help myself.
Hard act to follow. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I mean, sadly, I have to agree with most of what you said. I wish I didn't, but I do. And just to start off with some perspective from the UK, I agree absolutely what you've said. It's a narrative of the left versus right. It's a myth. Because both of our parties in the UK have moved towards the centre, because that's the only way you get elected. So that's about power. To the extent that our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, were recently described as, by an independent politician, as cheeks on the same arse. That arse being the arse of neoliberalism, because that's the system they both sign up to. That's it. Began in the 80s by Reagan and Thatcher. Okay, so the split is not in economics. Where the split is in our country is, I think, where it is here as well. It's in the culture wars, what have been known as a culture wars. A group of people on one side who think there ought to be changes in society in order to make it more fair, particularly for marginalised groups, and another group, largely on the right, let's say, who don't see the need for such a change. And this results in everyone just taking the moral high ground and fighting, thinking they're right. There's a very well-known UK journalist called John Ronson who made a series recently called Things Fell Apart, looking at the culture wars. Thank you, if somebody knows it. Looking at the culture wars and looking at particular examples from America. And I want to quote one because it maybe encapsulates what I think about the whole problem. So you may know this. In Florida, in the lockdown years, there was a huge row because some parents blamed the increased number in young people identifying with a gender other than that which they were assigned at birth increasing. And they said this is entirely to do with the high schools who are encouraging this. Okay, that's one thing. Then a couple of the parents came forward and said, now some young people are identifying as animals, namely cats. And further, that they're putting cat litter trays in classrooms in order to let them relieve themselves. Now, this is the stuff of stand-up comedy, okay? But actually, the story was taken up by some leading Republican politicians who said this is an example of the liberal left woke politics, or wokery. Woke, I'm sure you know, is now a term that's been completely hijacked by the right in order to represent a whole series of beliefs supposedly held by their opponents. Okay, so what they did, there was an investigation into this story, and they found out there are almost no cat litter trays in classrooms, apart from in one or two cases. Now, in those one or two cases, they were deemed as schools that were high risk from a maverick gun attack. And what they'd done in those classrooms is they'd made a system where they could lock down all of those classrooms so nobody could get in and nobody could get out, potentially for hours or even days. So the cat litter was there that in the event that that would happen, the students had somewhere to pee. That's it. Wow. So Ronson concludes that it's the truth that's fallen apart. He also says, interestingly, in his survey, it's quite a long survey, that actually, he thinks the culture wars are a smokescreen to stop us looking at the consequences of neoliberalism, that being the increasing divide between the very rich and the very poor, and that maybe that's what we should be fighting about. So I also agree with Scott. I don't think humour can bridge that realisation, because even when a story like that comes out and it's so absurd and proved to be false, someone will always tweet, well, I don't believe that. I think they are making our children act as cats. Because what is so funny or absurd to one side, a joke on one side, is a revealed conspiracy on another. And that's the way it is. I want to propose, just before I finish, that maybe we ought to ask why we're so polarised. And I want to suggest there are probably a few reasons. But first reason is There's nothing else apart from neoliberalism. So when that's the only kind of economic model to deal with at all, you have to argue about something else, because people are rich and people are poor. There's got to be a reason. And if you just accept neoliberalism, you've got to fight about something. Secondly, social and private media, obviously, where everybody has a soapbox. Thirdly, and Scott talked about this last night very eloquently, there is no reliable source of the truth anymore. So young people relying on TikTok for their news, and it sort of says it all. And fourthly, a theory that came up in the first 10 years of this century of super complexity. The idea being that the planet is now so nuanced and so complex that no government can be in control. They can't be. But in order to maintain power, they pretend that they can. Okay? It's all a bluff. So instead of comedy, maybe we need to address those things head on. For the four things. So first of all, maybe get rid of neoliberalism. Maybe just dump it for something else, some other kind of ideology. Maybe to do with saving the planet, because we're all in the same boat there. Secondly, don't use social media to give your opinion. I don't think it's helpful from either side. That's a contentious thing there, but I'm going to say. Third, be skeptical of all news channels, as Scott said. I'm not saying it's all lies, but it's almost certain to be a version of the truth. And finally, don't believe a government. Any government will help you solve your problems. If they say they are, they're probably bluffing. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Scott for the Trek reference. It's so close to my heart, I have to say. I am just a hopeless Trekkie. I can do it with both hands. This is what I spent my 7th grade summer learning how to do, to whistle with 2 fingers in my mouth, which I'm not going to demonstrate because my skills atrophied, to do a bridge of building a card, shuffling cards, and Star Trek on both hands. So really, I had great ambitions as a 7th grader. These skills have helped me enormously. But I also was going to say this question of the planet, the state of the planet. I do think every once in a while I'll think, well, as Carl Sagan says, there is intelligent life in the universe. The universe is so vast. With billions and billions of stars, there must be intelligent life. It's just that I think if they come here, they may, like you say, no, we're just gonna maybe go in the other direction. But I also have to say, my fellow panelists here, Michael, I have not heard that phrase, 2 cheeks on the same ass. I confess when you said it, the first thought that came to mind was Joe Manchin. But we'll save that for a later conversation, perhaps. What I guess I wanted to start with, in light of the question that has been posed to us, is an absolute fail on my part. So there's this French phrase, comme on l'escalier, like the thing you think about going down the stairs that you wish you'd said. So in the spirit of failing to heal the Great Divide, at the sort of beginning of the pandemic, it must have been sort of after the first vaccine, but before the second one was available, so you weren't sure if you were covered or not. We had painters at our house, and they had another job, so they were going to stay late, and I had nothing to cook for them. So I called this local bar, and I ordered hamburgers to bring to them. I'm sure that's not good for the environment as well, but that's a separate conversation. Anyway, I dash in this bar, I put my mask on, I walk in, no one is masked. It's in a rural town, and I, pay, and then I ask the bartender, where's the ketchup? So I go over to get the ketchup, and then I hear something in the background. This guy at the bar says, hey, why are you wearing that mask? And I was like, this could not be talking to me. I can't believe it. And I turned around, and he said, why are you wearing that mask? I can't see your face. And I have to confess that I said, are you talking to me? As if I was Robert De Niro. Are you talking to me? He repeated it, and I looked at him like, I could not, I was like, what? You don't know my health status or my family's health status or my mom lives with me. Why would you even impose to ask such a question? And then he said, I can't see people's faces. I want to see your face. And people are wearing masks and it's outrageous. And I was like, dude, you are not wearing a mask at all. Have you been vaccinated? I don't even want to know because I respect your right to privacy. And then we had a bit of an argument. It might have involved a curse word. You can, fill in the blank. So I said that, and then I left, and I was like, I handled that all wrong. But at first I was mad, so I'm driving, and I'm like, what I should have said? What I should have said is, excuse me, what? Oh, I don't speak jerk. I didn't understand. Oh, I would have been punched so hard. Like, I would have been knocked across it. So I was like, okay, that's not a very, peace-loving answer. By the time I get home, I'm like, oh, what I should have done is I should have broken into song. This is only going to appeal to those of you who, A, don't really understand how badly I sing, and B, understand the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. What I should have said is I should have paused, looked around the whole room, and I should have said, Jesus guy in a bar, who in the hell do you think you are? Oh my God, I would have just broken the whole mood. But I didn't, and so that's the story. All right.
If only.
And there lies the importance of humor.
Yes.
Well, thank you all. I have to say, I'm an optimist, so I'm really interested in how I'm going to walk away feeling after this, hearing all of this no hope for our future. But I would like to ask you guys a few questions, and we'll see where it goes. There are so many sensitive topics in conversations these days that it feels like we need to walk on eggshells, so as not to offend people, come across as disrespectful, or even worse, hateful. Some of these issues are so tough to talk about that very few people are comfortable engaging, and those that do are often shut down pretty quickly. In your experience, and it's very diverse, is there a way to use humor to break down these barriers and cross the divides while coming to a mutual, respectful understanding without things being overly emotional or politicized? In other words, can humor have an effective role in political discourse? So, Lisa, you just basically spoke to that if you want to start.
Well, I mean, if you use it properly, it could have an effective role. I actually, I think it does. I take Scott's point, the broader point of, what does change someone's mind, and I understand cognitive dissonance. I understand it more than I ever understood it before in these past 6 to 8 years, how, resilient or resistant people are to hearing information that contradicts their point of view. But I do think that humor can pierce through that. I'm reminded of all the George Carlin albums. This is how old I am, right? All the George Carlin albums I listened to, and amazing other commentators, but George Carlin in particular, because of his willingness to really assail, societal norms that people just accept. That he was able to kind of use humor to open people's minds to things that they might not otherwise be open to. And I think, I don't have any survey data to support this, but I have to believe that he was effective at least opening some people's minds through, raising in a humorous way questions that they might not question in a serious conversation. Personally, in terms of dealing with people in my family or extended family, I have deployed humor to try to, I sort of call it being the rodeo clown of the situation. When things get really tense, I have a tendency to not just let the tension grow, but to leap in over here, to try to, calm things down and point out some absurdity that then changes the atmosphere in the room. I can't say that I'm always successful, but I also feel like part of that is starting from a standpoint of real love or appreciation for the other person, even when they are deeply wrong, and trying to have compassion for helping understand why they think this thing. I remember having a conversation with a relative at one point several years ago about welfare, and they had this very racist set of remarks, and I was trying to describe how, in fact, the majority of people on welfare are white, and they didn't believe me, and I was like, you can look it up. They didn't want to look it up. I tried some humorous tactics to really open their eye to how what might be true, and then I gave them a website because I'm just hopelessly a nerd to teach them about this. And I don't know if they ever went to that website, but they never raised the topic with me again. So that was some sort of success, perhaps. And I guess the last thing I'll say. And this sort of goes against the idea of building bridges, but I have conversations with reporters pretty regularly about different issues, and every once in a while they'll say to me something like, Charles Koch is really sincere. He sincerely believes these economic lies that he peddles. They don't say lies, I substitute that word in. He sincerely believes it, or so-and-so is sincerely, anti-abortion, or so-and-so is sincerely, a doubter of climate change. And I always think I don't know, like sincerity, like is that a mitigating factor? Like if you're a racist, it's like, oh, but you're really sincere about it. Like that somehow mitigates the harm you cause. So my view is I try to focus on the effects versus the intentions. Like sincere, not sincere, believe, not believe. Like here is the concrete effect in your life. And this goes to Scott's point and your point, Michael, about like the real divide is the divide between ordinary people and these corporations that are just wrecking our planet for profit, and we have not been able to contain them from this ongoing destruction. Like how much profit does the oil industry have to have? It's never enough. It is an insatiable greed. And we really have to come together to deal with it because it is putting our planet on fire. Fire season? That is new and not funny. You know, I mean, I grew up in Colorado, so I've seen, you know, fire season way, but like fire season in British Columbia, fire season, you know, in my part of the country in Wisconsin, like those things are profoundly unfunny. And I guess I hope that through some humor we can break through and add more people to that awareness that we have to stand together to overcome this crisis.
Thank you. I'm afraid that on a personal level, I've never found humor as a way of bridging a group of people who have opposite views to my own. I live in London, but I come from Essex, which is kind of not a particularly interesting or exciting or economically well-off part of the country. And I go home occasionally, and all my cousins are deeply racist, and they talk to me about, you know, you're living in that London, they call. You're in that London, where in fact, the borough that I live in, Lewisham, is 50% non-white and 50% white. And I tried to counteract that with a bit of humour, and I'm afraid it goes nowhere. If anything, it kind of just it entrenches the polarity, the fact that I've left and I can't understand them and they can't understand me. Sorry to be negative, but that's my experience.
Interesting. So, yeah, I want to go back to your original question, Aaron, because Lisa and Michael disagree. Lisa thinks humor is a way to connect people and bridge the gap. Michael thinks no. I'm writing a book about this subject right now. It's called The Elements of Humor.
Nailed it.
And it's meant to be like Strunk and White's Elements of Style, but for humor. And so I've written other books on how to write comedy for comedy professionals, how to craft better jokes and stuff. This is like for the layperson. And as I'm researching it and writing it, I'm realizing that like what humor is. Humor, in my mind, is really just like a new dimension to communication. So there's regular communication, which is how you communicate when you're talking to customer service or in a court of law, talking to the police. But you can elevate and add a dimension to a conversation by introducing humor. And there are many different tools that you can use. There's 11 different tools of humor that you can use. And I feel like we've lost, in this state of the world, I feel like we've lost the ability to go there, to that other dimension. Because when you're in a fear state, you don't have access to the higher brain functions. Humor is a higher brain function. And so I don't want to get going on brain size here or anything, but they have done studies. People who are hard right conservative have more activity in their fear center, their amygdala. They are afraid. And the Republican politicians and the corporate media stir that up, and they feed that fear as much as they can. When you're in a fear state, you're in reptilian brain. You cannot engage in a humorous way with anything. Nothing is funny, So you have to break through that. And I feel like stand-up comedians are kind of the new philosophers, And, we all miss George Carlin, and Louis C.K. really rose to the top, and people gravitated, oh my God, somebody who's telling us what's going on and who can talk about tricky things. And then, he pulled his dick out to some women and rightfully disappeared from public view. And now we have Bill Burr, and we have these other people vying for this spot of who's our philosopher? Who's the person who can... And this is the holy grail in stand-up comedy right now, is the person who can tell the jokes about the things that divide us all these very controversial subjects, and tell them in a way that makes everyone laugh. And that's a really tricky skill. So to expect that all of us can do that, like a professional stand-up comedian, is asking too much. We can't do that. So I think we gravitate to the people who can. And it's hard. It's really hard to appeal to everyone in the audience. That's why you see like somebody like Jimmy Kimmel, who's incredibly talented. He's decided, I'm just going to appeal to the left. I'm not going to bother with the right, because it's too hard to do that. Whereas somebody like George Carlin and Louis C.K. and Bill Burr, they can appeal to the right as well. And I miss that level of skill in comedy. And I'm sure Jimmy Kimmel could do it too. He has to do a show every day, and it's like you're on a treadmill. You don't have time to like give every show you do the Pixar treatment. The Pixar treatment is, we're going to make a really fun kids movie, but every adult can go in and also enjoy the movie. That's really hard to do. They have to do all these extra layers. Every joke has another layer. So mom, who drags the kids here and they're loving it, mom can enjoy the movie too and doesn't have to sit through this stupid kids movie. We need the Pixar version of humor for the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add that I'd like to read that about the different types of humour, because when I'm talking to my cousins, I'm usually using irony. I'm trying to point out
that's one of the 11.
It's one of the 11, but it doesn't work with them because they just feel
a lot of people don't understand
irony.
irony.
I'm condescending.
Yeah.
I'm being condescending to them.
Exactly.
And
that's
that. So the conversation
try
shuts
madcap.
up. Try.
That's what Lisa uses.
Yeah.
It sounds
What's that?
like madcap is like goofy non sequitur physical humor. It's very disarming.
Right.
Carlin was a master at that because he would do all these funny faces and funny voices, and he'd use his body, and that's out of fashion in stand-up comedy. People stand, they don't move, and they say their jokes, and they don't change their. And that was a trend that was started by Dave Letterman. He didn't want people on the show being all crazy and using silly voices and doing impressions and having props. He wanted them just to stand there and read their jokes. And now a lot of people think that's how you have to do stand-up comedy. So yeah, madcap. It's funny that I'm telling you this because the British historically are much better at madcap than the Americans.
I'm not aware of that term at all. But I will read the book.
Well, like Monty Python, the Goon Show,
yes,
like they were very
silly.
silly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very silly.
They had very silly walks. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful madcap
No,
humor.
I get
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I get that. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, so have you seen an evolution in the way comedians present? I mean, the more polarized we get, the more intense things get. It seems like the role of humor is more important than ever, right?
I do feel like they are, I mean, maybe I'm biased because I'm in this field, but I feel like people really do gravitate to stand-up comedy as a place of sanity, where they don't get that from the traditional media. I can't watch the traditional media. I can't watch MSNBC or CNN, God help me, Fox News. I mean, actually, I watch that for entertainment. It is actually quite funny. But it's just so creepy because they're just so bought and sold, all those people. I don't believe a word they say. But comedy, like if you're laughing at it, there is some element of truth there probably. And I feel like we're all gravitating toward that now because we don't have faith in any other institution, And we don't have the skill ourselves necessarily to do it in our lives,
Yeah. It is a comfort.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I really, at least for the last several years since Stephen Colbert moved from the Colbert Report to his nighttime show, I've really enjoyed it tremendously, in part because at certain moments it's just so absurd what's happening in the political arena. It is like The Onion. How do you tell the difference between, like you said last night, Scott, like where does reality stop and the absurd begin? And then I feel like every once in a while, if I could just step back from my, outrage about like things like the violent insurrection, if I could see Trump as an insult comic and not as a
He's
person.
a very funny comic.
But this idea like, oh no, they're terrorists, not funny, but like if it were a joke, it could be funny. Oh no, this is Antifa, not Antifa attacking the Capitol, but like I'm too close to it to see the humor in it, but there is absurd humor because it's almost like just throwing out whatever might stick, or like taking a Sharpie to a map of a hurricane. Like, that's hilarious if it weren't like actual people in danger of a hurricane on the other side of the Sharpie. It would, like, someday this will be a lot funnier if we survive it, but in the middle of it, it's not so funny.
Yeah.
Not so funny.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, so when is too much too much? Or is there too much? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what are your thoughts on cancel culture specifically? And has it had an impact on the nature of comedy, performance, and satire? Is there too much at this point? I mean...
You're looking at me, so I'll take
well,
it.
no, I'm looking at all of you.
Are you looking
yes.
at everybody? Okay.
No, go for it.
I'll go for it. So I think cancel culture, it's a mixed thing. So I talked about Louis C.K. a second ago. I think if you're sexually assaulting people or raping people, fucking cancel them. Like, I don't care. Get out. I have no problem with that. And it's so funny because when cancel culture started becoming a thing, so many people would come to me and say, you're worried about this cancel culture thing? Every single one of them, a white man. Because that's who gets canceled. Because that's who's raping people, that's who's sexually assaulting people, that's who's using their power over other people. It's rare that someone outside that group is canceled. It happens, but it's a little rare. But obviously it can get to be too much. If somebody tweets something 10 years ago that now would be considered offensive, but back then it was like, who cares? And then they get fired, or they can't get a job or whatever. That's too much. And I'm not in academia, and I know that, and I'm also not in an office. I'm not in I don't work in a cubicle farm. So I know that things are much more tense there. Everybody's afraid of saying the wrong thing. They have sensitivity training and all that stuff. I kind of, so maybe I'm the wrong person to answer this because I really live outside that. I revel in the absurd and the outrageous and like doing things differently, and I would hate to feel constricted by, I don't know. I don't like being constricted by any kind of like societal rules of decorum or anything like that. I'm polite and I'm nice and I don't rape anyone, so I feel like, I can say what I want. And I have never gotten into trouble. The Onion over the years has gotten into trouble for certain things, but that's helped us because we built this reputation as being an equal opportunity offender. We're going to get in trouble for making fun of this group, and then we're going to get in trouble for this group. And if you make fun of all the groups, then people can't really say you're unfair. And we're making fun of ourselves. So, yeah, it's a really tricky thing for me to understand because, like I said, I'm kind of outside of it. Maybe you two can shed more light on it.
I just, cancel culture in the UK, people are being cancelled for having opinions. I find that difficult, actually, because the Onion's about having your own opinion, just being able to say whatever you want to say, which I think is what should happen. But for example, there's a well-known politician, the first black woman Labour Party politician was Diane Abbott, a woman called Diane Abbott. About a year ago, the Labour Party stopped her, cancelled her, got rid of her because she said something, she tweeted something about the difference between being black and Jewish. This was difficult. She said, okay, both of us are marginalised, but actually there's a thing about black people that, you cannot avoid it, you are spotted, which is different from being Jewish. That's what she said.
Which is a true point.
Well, it seems
they are
like
a visible minority.
It seems like a fair point.
Yeah.
But the Labour Party sacked her because the Labour Party had in the past some instances of genuine, anti-Semitism.
People are crazy with the anti-Semitism. Yeah. Like they really are crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Ilhan Omar is my representative in Minneapolis. Yeah. And my partner is Ashkenazic Jew. Yeah. So we went to an Ilhan Omar. Sorry to interrupt.
It's all right. No, dude. I'll come back.
Great. We went to a town hall, and because she gets pilloried for being anti-Semitic, and there are people on the right who say, "Oh, she's an anti-Semite." They just take it as fact, when all she said was, "Israel does what they do because they get funding. They're getting a lot of funding from America." How is that anti-Semitic? Obviously, there's the anti-Semitic trope of Jews caring, more about money than other groups, but you can't not talk about that when you're talking about funding a military. You're talking about money, whether it's Jews or not. So these things just get so carried away. But the anti-Semitism thing really bothers me particularly because people are so quick to tar people with that.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the Anti-Defamation League, which is they come after you hard. Like we made so many jokes in The Onion, and to our credit, we only made those jokes after we hired Jewish writers. Before we had Jewish writers, we weren't making jokes about Jews because we didn't know enough about them. But we had a great headline, Texas Jews celebrate Holocaust Texas style. Did I say celebrate? I meant commemorate Holocaust Texas style. And the Anti-Defamation League called us, was very upset. You can't do that, you're making fun of the Holocaust. It's just shut up. We're having fun. Continue.
So Diane Abbott is sacked, and about a year later, a story comes up that a leading Conservative donor, somebody who puts millions of pounds into the Conservative Party, was caught on record of saying, "I really can't stand that Diane Abbott. She makes me want to kill all black women." This was what was said, okay? Immediately, the Conservative Party say, "Oh, that's terrible. That is a terrible thing to say. We distance ourselves from all that." But they keep taking the money. They even take more money after that story has come out.
Of course.
The Labour Party, meanwhile, just go, "Yes, it's a terrible thing to say, but we're still sacking her." So
Yeah.
everybody is clamoring to get the moral high ground because that is the most important thing in order to maintain power.
The self-canceling bothers me the most.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Because then you have someone like Trump who does all the things that would get you canceled, but he doubles down, he fights, and so he can't get canceled because he says, what I just said is, fuck you, leave me alone. And that works. But if you self-cancel, cancel culture will have a lot of power.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
I really appreciate the line you drew, Scott, about people who are sexual predators or engaged in harming other people versus they make a mistake. Like I was like, what is cis? Like at the beginning of the use of this term, cis versus male, female, all the boxes I checked as a kid on all these census forms. I had to adapt. Oh, what is this thing? Oh, I can see how this affects, like if this is the norm, like if it's heterosexuality versus homosexuality, well, I need to learn more, trans, like LGBTQ plus, like learning what all the words are. Like for some of us in this room, that was not, what the state of the world was in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. It's been an evolution, and I think it's been a positive evolution to understand the reality of just the diversity of human existence, human sexuality, the spectrum of views people have, when I think about the bigotry that we see, I cannot imagine. I mean, I read reports, obviously, but I can't imagine the idea that you can't be with the person you love. Like that is such a fundamental. Who wants to walk around? Who thinks that their religion gets to tell them that someone else doesn't get to marry, some adult doesn't get to marry another adult who they love? Like that is the most depraved in my view, regardless of how sincere the view is. Then don't marry someone of the same sex. But like, why do you have to impose that on someone else? It's so fundamental. And so, in terms of cancel culture, it's like, there's certainly maybe instances in a workplace where people have not gotten the memo. They didn't know. Oh, you can't say that anymore. Oh, wait, that word, gypsy, like that's not a good word. Can't use gypped. Don't use that word. Like there are things that we've learned that weren't the way in the 70s when things were pretty ignorant on a lot of these subjects. And so, that I think is more like, oh, hey, did you know that that's really offensive? And the person, a moral person would go, whoa, I didn't mean to offend. In fact, at one point, I was reading this Emily Post book about like how to survive in the workplace at the Justice Department when I first was working there. And the guidance was if someone says something, racist or sexist, to be like, I know you didn't mean for that to, be racist or sexist. And usually a person would say, no, I never meant that. And then you go, because like this means this, or this has this effect. You could have like a dialogue about it. And so I feel like there's like that area where people feel fearful about being canceled for making using a phrase from like, the 80s or even the 90s that isn't current. And I feel like those are things where it's just an opportunity for a dialogue, for a conversation. And then there's actual abusers. Like when Brett Kavanaugh was nominated for the U.S. Supreme Court, and I was writing about how he had lied under oath repeatedly and should not be elevated and should be impeached. This was before Christine Blasey Ford's story was leaked, and she ultimately testified before the Senate. And as these conversations were happening, there was a lot of conversation about false accusations. You have to be very wary of false accusations. It's a really big issue with false accusations. Sort of goes to your question of like, who are the people worried about false accusations? Fit a particular demographic. And as I was looking, I was like, wow, but like in reality, what we have is a culture of false denial. false denial is the real culture. Because like false accusation, super rare. False denial, pretty fucking prevalent. Oh, I cursed. I apologize to the audience out there and in here.
I have already dropped a couple of F-bombs.
But, you know,
Whatever rule that was, it's gone.
Okay. But, you know, I mean, it's just like reorienting the way we see things. Like, for her to come forward and testify just, you know, ruined her life, her personal safety. You know, who would do that, like, as a lie? But the desire to, like, lie that something happened, like, that's a pretty common thing. In fact, there's a whole commandment about, you know, lying, bearing false witness, you know, all those things. So I think there are lines to be drawn that particularly involve behavior. But also I do think that if someone is, you know, a repeat offender of, like, someone's like, hey, when you say this, it really offends me, you should stop offending them. It's sort of the same thing about when someone asks you to call you their name or their gender. What, like, as my neighbor across the street who said I talked too much as a kid, I can't imagine where he got this idea. He used to say, like, who pulled your tail? But it's like, who made you king or who made you queen? Like, why would someone think they get to tell someone else what their name is? You know, that's ridiculous. Someone says, call me Joe or call me Jane or call me cisgendered or call me trans. Like, whatever, I'll call you whatever you want me to call you as long as I can say it on, you know, broadcast television. You know? So I just think, you know, that I think those are real. And I think part of it is whether we have a culture or we can cultivate a culture of, you know, respect for individuals' right to be free. And being free includes being able to marry who you love and being called the name you want and having the pronouns, you know, that you want used, notwithstanding the fact that Mrs. Schramm, my fantastic 7th grade English teacher, taught me the importance of subject-verb agreement. So what? It's about human dignity. So, you know, that's my answer.
Well, and so you spoke to a couple of different things just now. On a personal level, there is definitely an accountability and we should be respecting. But comedians seem to get away with blatantly insulting and poking fun at things, taboo topics, marginalized groups. And we don't really hold them accountable, typically, right? I mean, we just accept this as part of comedy. Whereas, again, on the personal level, we definitely are held accountable for it. So I guess what I'm wondering is, what is the difference? Why because you're up on stage or you're on a talk show, can you do this? And you can be pretty offensive, but we still laugh and we still accept you and we still pay your paycheck. And so what is that divide? Why is it different?
I'm going to dive in here and probably regret it. But, you know, I think it depends on who's saying it. Like Richard Pryor, listened to a lot of Richard Pryor albums growing up, listened to some great rap, but there are words I don't sing. You know, it's not my place to sing those words, but a rapper can, you know, use that term, retake that language. The same way someone who's gay, you know, can take the word queer. If I use that word as a heterosexual woman, like, it has a slur component. If someone self-identifies and says I'm queer, they're taking that slur and taking it as their own, you know, sense of power to disarm the smear of that word. And so I do think it's partly really the context. Different people have different perspectives and can share their perspective, their life's journey, in a way that if someone else said it actually might genuinely be malicious or insulting, deliberately so, and then then there may be consequences for them, or maybe not. Maybe they've got a niche audience that wants to hear that sort of thing. But I just think, I think it's important in any situation to understand the context.
Yeah, I think what's happening is, because, like I said before, no one's in charge. So if you think of the culture, everyone in this culture, as just being a bunch of kids in a high school, which is also just no one's in charge, it's a Darwinian jungle, where there are bullies and there are kids who are bullied and there are some kids who can somehow navigate. We have a culture now where there is a subset of people who are bullies, and they've decided, I'm going to be a bully. And I'm going to call someone by a name they don't want to be called, and that's my right to do that, because I'm a bully. And so what you mentioned about comedy, Aaron, the smart comedians and the good comedians don't do that. But there are some comedians who have decided that's a pretty big section of the culture, you know, maybe it's like 10 to 20% of people are like diehard, I will not use a wrong pronoun for someone. So they're going to appeal to them. And that's going to be their audience. So Rob Schneider decided to do that. I thought Dave Chappelle made a big misstep when it wasn't even a joke. He just like, in his, a couple of specials ago, just said he didn't believe in trans people, didn't believe it was a thing. That's just so ignorant and so stupid. But he's so well liked, and he's had so many successful, his comedy show and all his specials. People love it. He's not going to get canceled again like Trump. He didn't back down. He didn't self-cancel. But a lot of people kind of in the other 80% of the culture were like, you shouldn't have done that. Why did you do that? But the 20% is like, Dave Chappelle's the GOAT. And so now he's got a lot of really diehard fans in that realm. That's kind of how I see it. That's kind of how I see things going. I think the 80% are, we want to be polite. We want to be nice to people. We want to be bullies. But bullying is profitable. There's a reason kids in high school are bullies. They get something from it. They get power, So it's not going to go away.
And in fact, I think one of the things that has happened culturally is that, and you can see this with the recent news about the hiring of a new clerk by Clarence Thomas, someone who had, in a documented way, as Jane Mayer has documented, made a number of just really outrageous, offensive claims, and then claimed that she didn't, and anyway, ended up living with Clarence Thomas and Jenny Thomas and becoming like a daughter to them, and got these fancy clerkships, and now is clerking in the Supreme Court. That's like getting rewarded for the notoriety. There's a component in this current celebrity culture that if you say something extreme, particularly on the right, I don't really think so on the left, but on the right, then you might get a podcast, you might get like a deal or something, and so it has the wrong incentives for civil society in a way that's distressing. And like you said, if they don't back down, then they get a niche, they get a micro audience or whatever that then can fuel their fame. Anyway, I've got more examples of that, but I won't go into them. But just to say, I think that dynamic of the sort of micro audiences has fueled people who want to appeal to some audience with really offensive things and get pretty rich doing it. I'm not recommending that, by the way. Do not recommend it.
Yeah, they are rewarded, and there's in comedy, there's a lot of comedians who see that that's a path that you can take for instant success if you appeal to that audience. And I've talked to a lot of comics who say, so many of my friends have taken that route, and they get booked more, and people come to their shows, and it's so seductive because it's a more fervent base, just like in high school, everything is an analogy. It's just like in high school, bullies have toadies and henchmen who glom onto them because they're powerful, You can't really escape that. The only way to really escape it is, there's no way to escape it. We can't. It's who we are.
I would just advocate for sort of greater tolerance, really, and say that I think any comedian ought to be able to say anything. We don't have to listen to them. We don't have to like them. We don't have to support them. And I think maybe we need to be a little bit tougher and more resilient in being able to deal with things that we don't like to hear. But what's the alternative is censorship. The alternative is stopping those things, and all that's going to do is fuel it and make it worse.
Agreed. Yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah, like Mel Brooks. His musicals, have taken on a lot of these themes, and he's been very successful at using satire to really, who knew you could do a whole musical about springtime for Hitler. I thought that musical was brilliant, but if that were censored, that would have been a loss to our culture, and it was a tremendous way to actually make fun of this horrible person, this horrible regime, this outrageous part of our history, and I would have hated for him to feel like he couldn't do a musical like that to really poke righteous fun at Hitler. Of course, I also really like the film. I forget his name. One of the big filmmakers who has made his last 8th film or what have you.
Quentin Tarantino.
Tarantino on this whole at the movie where they change the tide at the end. The Bastards movie, right? So Inglourious Bastards, where at the end, the end is that Hitler is, destroyed in this theater, and the whole gang is, and like, you know, that had a cathartic, I have to confess, that had a cathartic ending for me. But, you know, I just think, to your point, this question of artistic creativity, license for humor and satire, I think it is important to be able to have people who are able to create those satires that put a new light on things.
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I think it's our responsibility, if we're in that 80% where we just want to be polite, we don't want to encourage bullying, to allow it and be polite about it and say, okay, you know, have your thing, but not get too worked up about it, and just know that that's going to be a thing. There's going to be stuff in the culture that's happening that you don't like, you know.
Yeah. And now I'm going to add one more thing, because I've been thinking about this now that I'm no longer a college student. I don't know if you can tell, although I could come back, but I've been pondering these sort of these TP USA, this Turning Point USA thing with Charlie Kirk and all the lies and nonsense he spreads. And, you know, there are protests, and then there's effort to crack down on protests. You can't actually dissent against the outrageous things he says at some universities. And I'm like, you know, people should just organize this as me telling youth to do something which is the wrong thing to do. By the way, don't do that. I'm going to do it right now. Which is like, you know, we should have a dance party outside of the Charlie Kirk thing and be like, no, this is where the fun is, not in your, you know, ridiculous, like, lie machine, but out here where we're having a dance party, you know, where we're using dance and music to, you know, say, you know, buzz off. You know, but like to just turn the tide, turn the tone from like clash into like, no, come to the people of joy. Right. You know?
Yeah, it's good point.
Thank you.
Undermine it.
Yeah.
Well, we are approaching the last 15 minutes, and so we're going to take questions from the audience in 1 second. But I would like to ask one last question, and that is, speaking of changing perspectives and giving advice, are there any tactics or anything that you guys can suggest to those of us who are not artists or comedians to make use of comedy, humor, or satire when bringing up sensitive topics at, say, a family reunion or around the dinner table? Things where we can actually bring things up in a respectful but lighter way, so that we can encourage civil discourse even among our families. We've all spoken actually to that point a little bit here today. So what would you recommend so that we are not the black sheep of the family?
Everybody's looking at me. Well, like I said, I'm writing a book about this very thing, and similar to what Michael and I were just talking about, there are 11 different tools of humor that most people probably don't know or use. Professional comedy writers use them. They're all literary devices like irony, parody, misplaced focus, madcap we talked about. Meta humor is a good one. They're great, and more people need to understand how to use those, because they really can pierce through and connect human to human instead of like connect political idea to political idea, which is just not a pleasant way to connect with people nowadays. Yeah.
I'm not a comedian, but I'd just like to say in response that around the dinner table is the time to do it, not social media. That's what I would advocate. A face-to-face conversation is the only way.
Good tip.
Yeah, when you said that we're comedians, my husband says, you just keep telling yourself that, Lisa. That's what he says when I sing too. I'm like, you know, I love to sing, and he's like, I know. And then I did karaoke one time, and I heard my voice come out the speaker, and I came home and I said, I can't sing, and he said, I know. I've been telling you for years, don't quit your day job. And I was like, yeah, because I was never going to be on American Idol. And he's like, not even close. But I do find solace in humor, and so I would recommend pre-ordering Scott's book, because I'm going to do that. So
thank you.
Me too.
Thank you. Those are great. So we're going to ask questions now from the audience. If either one of you can answer it or all of you can answer it, but this one is from a student. In the King's Court, the jester held a unique position in that he was the only one allowed to deliver criticism toward the king, disguised as playful mockery. Do comedians today hold a similar responsibility of using their craft to criticize and sometimes expose corruption in our current leaders?
I don't think they have any obligation to play that role, only if that's the comedy that calls to them. In my opinion.
Jesters were also servants to the kings. They were beholden to the king. I'm not sure that's the relationship we want comedians to have.
Yeah, so they divide satire into these two categories: Juvenalian satire and I'm spacing on the other one. Horatian satire, I think, is the other one. And The jester is a Horatian satirist, meaning he plays along, he doesn't rock the boat, and he's safe. So late night talk show, perfect example. But then you have your Juvenalian satirist who is breaking the rules, getting in trouble. That's what we always tried to be at The Onion, you know, where we're going to say the thing that you wouldn't be allowed to say on network TV for that, you know. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's sort of how it breaks down in terms of the jester, in my opinion.
Thank you. Here is a really different one. Given that legacy media has an older demographic, what is the future of legacy media in comedy and the news? This is also from a student.
And the music, is that what you said?
The news.
Oh, the news.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to take?
I'm not familiar with them, so
Okay.
I can't answer that.
I am familiar with the news, and I don't find it funny very often, so I'm not sure. But I appreciate the idea of this question of the demographic changes in terms of how people consume media. I don't know what that means, except for what I know is from some work that I've been doing with some colleagues at this thing called the Bold Rethink. What they found is that even though a huge portion of TikTok is dance, and it's amazing, it's really amazing how creative people are. I actually find that whenever I go to a protest, the signs people make, like, people are so clever and creative, and TikTok in many ways is part of that. But within that TikTok, you know, that broad heterogeneous culture of TikTok, it's also the case that people making, you know, short videos about politics and things that that they care about. There's a Southern guy named Crowder who, you know, has given some, you know, who does these little videos. I don't know if they're on Facebook or TikTok, but like this idea of a 3-minute, 5-minute little piece about putting something in a new light or sharing it. They've been widely shared, and so it's not like TikTok. It's not just for dance, in case you were staying out of it because you don't want to share your dance moves. That would be my reason. But, you know, I just think I think we should be open to a variety of ways of getting information as long as we ultimately check that it's true and not just some sort of viral conspiracy theory that sounds good, which I don't think is typically the case, but like, you know, to trust but verify or something, or maybe not trust but verify, yeah.
Yeah, Dovi, no Provi. Remember Reagan said that?
Yeah.
Trust but verify. So yeah, I feel like it's an evolution, and it's a good thing to see the change, you know, as the old guard passes on and this legacy media goes away. With the hope of new media was that people would have access to non-corporate controlled news and information, but it hasn't worked out that way. They have access to conspiracy theories and ignorance, and people don't really know how to judge whether that's true or not. So, yeah, it's very distressing to me how little a role science and fact-checking plays in the media and in how people get information. It's a total failure of our education system and our media in general. So eventually the corporate media is going to figure out how to, you know, integrate into the new media, so they're not really going to miss out. They're not going to like suddenly run out of money or go out of business. They're just going to find new ways to, you know, to propagandize. So I don't know what's worse, propaganda or like an ignorancy-fueled conspiracy theory. They're both pretty bad, and that's kind of what you got. Those are your two choices right now in the news media. So.
I was going to add something just that I've thought about a lot over the years with the kind of, can you persuade, like, people who are conspiracy theorists, like, can you persuade them? Someone said to me, what's the one thing you would say to someone who believes this, you know, particular lie or this particular conspiracy? And I was like, you know, if what's happening in the world hasn't persuaded them, if their family hasn't persuaded them, me, a stranger, is unlikely to have like the magic word that's going to just suddenly pierce through. But I do take some solace, although it's not much solace, but some solace in the fact that, like, when you look at some of these polls over time, when Nixon left office, in the wake of Watergate and, you know, cash slush fund in the safe and the break-in, 30% of the people still thought he was doing a good job. 30%. Maybe 29, 30, depending on your poll. When George W. Bush left office in 2008, after the economy just flatlined and, you know, documented lies about torture and lying us into a war in Iraq, still 30% of the people thought he did a good job. So, like, that's like a resilience, like, but it stayed constant, right? It's like a 30% thing. So I always think like, well, I'm looking for the other 60 or 70% of people who might be persuadable. I'm not sure that I could persuade someone who thought that Nixon was doing a great job, even after all that. They're not my target audience. That's not to mean that I don't care. I hope they're happy. I wish them well. I want them to open their eyes. But I'm really thinking like, those niche audiences, they are filling some of that 30% of people who will believe, apparently almost anything, and so I want to think about like, how can I try to persuade 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, maybe 60 is really a better number, with, ideas about what's happening in reality, and not be obsessed about like trying to get 100%. I haven't gotten 100% on anything since tests, Yeah.
Thank you. And to piggyback on that, this is another question from the audience. What are some fun ways to help both sides understand the truth that we are all on the human side with corporations on the other side? So we're bringing people together. We're trying to bring people together. How do we do that?
Well, I think billionaires are funny. I think we should talk about the crazy things they think are true. It's really interesting because like when I think of a billionaire, I think that is the last dude I would ever want to be in charge of like a democracy, because they surround themselves with yes men and yes women. If you don't say yes, you get fired. Like this is not a democratic or necessarily fact-based system. It's one where they basically say but in a less benevolent way than my beloved Captain Picard. Make it so. So they have people around them who their job is to make it so. And some of these billionaires believe crazy things. And I just think, people should know, oh, this billionaire who believes this particularly crazy thing is funding this group that's trying to destroy your rights. I want to draw those connections. And so I don't know if I answered the question, but I probably didn't. I might have sort of. But I just think, that, telling people who these billionaires are, not that I wish them ill, I want them to, go colonize the moon, I don't care. Just leave us alone. In fact, go, yeah, go. But I just think we can do more to show how different they are than us. There's this billionaire in Pennsylvania named Jeffrey Yass who said, look, when you make $70,000, the difference between me, a billionaire, and a $70,000 salary guy is like, we just, we all, have our devices, et cetera. And he said the only difference between a poor person and a rich person is that the poor person doesn't like his job. And I think people should know that about the guy who's trying to capture the state of Pennsylvania. So I want to tell that story both factually and with humor, because I think it's deeply funny and horrible, and that people might go, Yass is not on my side. This dude, that's not the difference between rich and poor people. He doesn't get it. So yeah, that's how I want to help tell the story, both factually and with some humor.
Thank you. I would just go back to what I said earlier, in that we need to challenge the political ideologies that we're all accepting. And I think, it's time that we looked again at maybe, it's a difficult thing to say in America, but maybe capitalism isn't the right word. Maybe there's something else rather than capitalism. Maybe there's something else. And the trouble is, everything else, all the other things, have been kind of trashed. They've been proved not to work. So we need a new way. We need another way. We need another way. I suggested that it might be actually to do with saving the planet. That actually all the everything we do in terms of economics ought to be about sustainability and saving the planet. That's where we should go. That's where we should go. That seems fairly obvious, rather than just let's make a profit.
It's very obvious. I just want to build on what you two both said, which is growing up, my dream was that the human race would get to where they were in Star Trek: The Next Generation. They're enlightened. There's no poverty. There's no war. It's just like this socialist utopia where everybody has freedom and everybody can explore, to their heart's content, whatever they want to explore. And they were just a more highly evolved human being. Total pipe dream. It's wonderful science fiction. It's very aspirational. That's not who human beings are. The inexorable tide of history is we are ruled over by rich, powerful men. Since the very beginning of the human race, there's been a man at the top who's a despot, who's a tyrant, who is God, and who has all the wealth, and everybody else is a serf. And things have gotten a little better, you know, because we have, on paper, we have a constitution, we have a democracy, we have freedom. But you can see when you don't exercise that eternal vigilance, that inexorable tide just comes on back. And pretty soon, you know, Reagan came into office and changed the tax code. Clinton doubled down on that, got rid of welfare, you know, became a neoliberal. And so the wealth disparity just increased. It's just such a natural, if you don't fight it, it just comes back. And so now we have, like, Elon Musk could run for president in 2028 and win. Because when you're a billionaire, you own the message. You own the means of communicating with people. So you can't fight that. And so, sorry, back to the gloom and doom again.
I'm just going to say we can fight. We have to fight it. But I appreciate the idea that, I mean, I agree, and yet I think we can prevail. And in my personal capacity, if Elon,
I hope you're right.
If Elon,
that's how optimistic I am.
Okay.
I hope you're right.
I'm gonna take that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We may be forced to by what happens to the planet. We may be forced to change.
Yeah.
We might.
It's too late. It's too late.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were saying it was, remember in 2006, they were saying if we don't do something by 2007, it's too late.
Yeah.
It's 2024.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
You know?
But we have to mitigate what we can. And
Yes.
And
I'm all for the fight,
Yes.
even if it's in vain. No, really, we have. What else can we do?
If you don't
we have to fight.
If you don't fight, they definitely win. And if we do, you know, come together, band together, and, you know, really try to protect our planet, we can, you know, mitigate this. But it's going to take a lot of work. So
Absolutely.
I'm signing up.
And fighting against the machine, you know.
Yeah.
And so polarization is not the answer.
What's that?
So divide and polarization,
No,
they are
not
the
the
answer.
Not the answer.
And we are going to end on that positive
All right.
note, actually, despite the doom and gloom beginning.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
So I just want to say this has been wildly fascinating and surely entertaining, and I'd like to thank our speakers for their candid and insightful replies. I'd also like to thank our audience for the questions that you gave us to enhance this conversation. Enjoy the rest of the conference.